Okay, so we're going to pick up from where we left off. So last time we talked about demand. Here we're going to talk about supply. Okay, so supply is a lot like the demand curve in many respects. It's also a relationship between price and quantity. Okay, but this time it's the relationship between the price that the seller receives for the product and how much of the product he's willing to provide. Okay, in the context of the labor market, what this means is how much labor are you willing to supply at a given wage. Okay, so while the demand curve represents someone else giving up dollars in exchange for things, the supply curve is someone else giving up things in exchange for dollars. Okay, and so at some level, the supply curve is nothing more than the demand curve, sort of like in reverse, right? And so what we have is sort of a upward sloping supply curve, and I'll call it S1 for now. Okay. And so let's think about sort of a situation. In the notes, I describe a situation that I sort of faced about a year ago. In that, I was living in a house that had and it had 8 beds in it. Okay, and so I literally did push 2 of them together to form a king size bed, and I had 2 in the second bedroom for guests, and I did have a couch in the living room that was made of beds, and I did have 2 that were just sort of lying around doing nothing. Okay, and so if someone were to come up and ask to buy 2 beds, and let's say they were mine and they weren't my landlord's, right? Which beds would I give up first? Would I give up the bed that I was sleeping on, or would I give up those beds that were just sort of lying around doing nothing, right? Well, of course, I'm going to give up the beds that are lying around doing nothing, and because I'm not using them for anything, I'm willing to sell them for a pretty low price. Okay, so the very first group of beds, or the very first beds that I sell, right? I sell them for a low price. Okay, but then let's say someone else comes up and says, hey, I want to buy some beds too. And I say, the beds that I sold the other person, I wasn't using them for anything. And so, I gave them up for a very low price. The beds that I would sell you, I am kind of using them. I'll still sell them, but it's going to have to be for a higher price because, again, I'm actually using them for something. Okay, and so I would sell beds again for the next group of beds, or the marginal beds, for a slightly higher price. All right, and so it goes on, and now I'm left with just my bed, my 2 beds pushed together to make a king size bed, and the beds in my guest house, right? So I've got my bed and 2 separate beds, right? And so someone comes up and says, hey, I want to buy 2 of your beds, right? And I say, okay, well, I've sold the beds that weren't doing anything for me, and I've sold the beds that I was using to make a couch in my living room. Now you're asking me to give up either my bed that I sleep on or the bed that I put guests on when they come and visit, right? Both of those uses are pretty valuable to me. I enjoy being able to give people a place to stay when they come see me, right? And I also enjoy having a place to sleep on my own, right? And so I'm not really going to be willing to sell these things unless you offer me a high enough price. And so if you offered a high enough price, I would give up the beds in my guest room. Okay, and so you want me to sell some more beds, and I will, but you're gonna have to pay me a little bit more. All right, and if you were to ask me to give up the beds in my own bedroom, you would have to pay me quite a bit. All right, because it turns out I enjoy sleeping on a bed. Okay, so we get sort of a upward sloping supply curve reflecting the fact that I'm going to I'm going to give up the least valuable thing first and the most valuable thing second, or last, rather, right? And so the demand or the supply curve slopes upward, reflecting that. The whole idea being that as I give up more and more of these things, I have to give up more and more valuable uses of these goods. Okay? Now, and the same is going to be true for everything else. You know, if you were just lying around doing nothing on a Monday, afternoon, I might, come up to you and say, hey, and we were neighbors, let's say. I might come up and say, hey, why don't you come over here and work for me for an hour? I'll give you 20 bucks, and I'll give you $10. Let's do $10, okay? I'll give you $10, and in exchange, you come work for me for an hour and rake my leaves or vacuum my living room or something, right? And you might be like, yeah, I've got nothing else that I'm doing, right? Might as well get $10, okay? So your first hour of work, right? You're willing to give it up for a low price simply because you're not doing anything with that hour. If I asked you for a second hour, right? Well, now you might be giving up. Let's say you're giving up watching your favorite television show or something else, right? Now I've got to pay you more because the opportunity cost of your time is now higher, right? You've already given up your hour of doing nothing. Now I'm asking you to give up an hour of your favorite television show, right? And that's pushing it, but if I pay you enough, you'll do it, right? And then if I want you to work for me for a third hour, right? So if I want you to work for another hour here, right? Let's say you're giving up time with your boyfriend or girlfriend or husband or wife or whatever, right? Well, now you're giving up, time with your significant other. That's really valuable, right? And you're not going to be willing to do it for anything, right? Unless I pay you enough, right? And so the point is that as I ask you to give up more and more of your time, you're going to ask me to give up more and more of my dollars, right? Because that time becomes more and more valuable to you, okay? Now, like in the case of demand, we have the same sort of thing, a distinction between quantity supply and supply, right? And just like with demand, right, we have the supply curve is the entire curve here, and the quantity supply is a number, or another way to think of it is it's a point along the curve. So all of these are all of these here are quantities supplied, and this here is the supply curve, right? Don't get these things mixed up. It's the same sort of thing, okay? and like demand as well, we can have shifts in supply, and just like with demand, an increase is a shift to the right, okay, and a decrease is a shift to the left. Okay, so remember, so in economics, at least at this point, everything we're doing is going left or right, left or right. We're not going up, we're not going down, not going diagonal, right? We're going left or right, left and right. So decrease, increase, decrease, increase, okay? And also like demand, there are 4 factors that can shift supply, and these are found on page 5 of the notes. Okay, so if we go over it really quickly, just to do it in brief, a change in the overall number of suppliers of the good. So what that's going to do, if there's more people providing the good or service in this case, that means at every price there will be more of it available, which we would represent as an increase in supply. Okay, and the same could also be said, if the number of suppliers were to decrease, we would see a decrease in supply. Okay. The second one is a change in the price of an alternative product. Right. So let's say you are farming right now, and you're growing corn and soybeans. Okay. And right now, you're splitting your farmland, between corn and soybeans. So you have 100 acres. You use 50 of them to grow corn and 50 of them to grow soybeans, right? And let's say the price of each one is $1 per acre, right? So I'm sure this is completely unrealistic, but we're going to go with it. So for every acre of soybeans you plant, you earn $1, and for every acre of corn that you plant, you earn $1, right? Let's say that the price of soybeans doubles, right? So now for every acre of soybeans you plant, you earn $2 for every soybean, and you still only earn $1 from the corn. Well, what are you going to do? You're probably going to grow soybeans, right? And so the supply of soybeans, right, is going to increase, right? And the supply of corn is going to decrease, right? And so what you end up seeing, right, is the supply curve moving as well. Okay, so changing conditions in the market can lead to people allocating their production in different ways, and that will influence the supply curve as well. Another thing that might influence the supply curve is a change in technology. Right, so Henry Ford and the assembly line is sort of the classic example here. So think about what Henry Ford did. Right, so Henry Ford comes up with the assembly line, or implements it most efficiently, would probably be the most historically accurate way of framing that. And what happened? Well, he was able to pump out cars really, really quick, right? Boom, 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 right? And as a result, what happened? Well, there are more cars available, right? And so the supply of cars shifted to the right, okay? We don't really see decreases in technology. But I give you the joke in the notes. Every post-apocalyptic, I spell it wrong in the notes, so I'll have to fix that. Every post-apocalyptic movie or can be thought of as dramatic decreases in the supply of all goods, right? So what's going on in Terminator, right? In Terminator, right, the machines have taken over, and they have made it difficult for all human beings to live. And so what's going on, right? The supply curve of goods has decreased. Or think about, oh, that movie's escaping my name now, so I can't do it. Zombie movies are zombie shows and everything, right? That's all just a decrease in the supply of goods. That's all it is, right? If the supply curve stayed where it was, it'd be a very boring movie, right? Everyone would just be like, oh, yeah, cool, we're equally wealthy, and now we just have to, fend off a couple of zombies, right? The problem with the zombie movies is that everything now becomes very scarce. There's only so many bullets, there's only so much water, right? There's only so much food, there's only so much shelter, etc., etc. Okay, and what's that? Well, that's just the supply curve has shifted to the left. Okay, and then the last one is again, just like with demand, is a change in the expected price of a good. Okay, and so I give the example in the notes of fine wine. Okay. So suppose that you are currently producing and selling 100 bottles of wine per year, okay? And you find out that people really like to buy your wine, age it for a year, and then they sell it for 10 times the price that they paid. Okay, so they're selling it now for a significant profit. Okay, what would you want to do? Okay, so you know what's going on. People are buying your wine, putting it in their basement for a year, and then they're selling it for 10 times the price. Are you still going to sell 100 bottles of wine this year, or are you going to sell fewer, right? Odds are you're going to want to sell fewer bottles of wine this year, right? So that you can sell more wine next year, okay? And so what you're going to do, right, is supply will decrease. It'll shift to the left for wine this year. And then for wine next year, it'll actually shift to the right. Okay, so you'll have something that looks kind of like black for this. You'll have wine today and wine tomorrow. I think that's right. Again, I don't spell, so just deal with it. Price and quantity, supply, price and quantity, supply. Okay, so wine today. All right, if you're going to not sell the wine today and age it and sell it tomorrow, well, all you would be doing is saying, okay, less wine is being sold today. I'm less willing to sell wine today than I was before, and I am more willing to sell wine tomorrow. Okay, so we basically are moving wine across time without a DeLorean, without a TARDIS, without any Terminator technology or anything like that. We're just moving the wine across time, which is kind of cool. Okay, and so all of these factors can shift supply. And the important thing here is to recognize when we're talking about supply, we're talking about your willingness to sell the good or to provide the good. Okay, so if there's a change in price, we're going to be moving along the supply curve, right? And if there's a change in your willingness to provide the good, we're going to actually move the good. So if we go back sort of to the price of the alternative product, right? Note that the supply, when I said the supply of soybeans, right? When the price of soybeans rises, right, you're going to provide more soybeans and less corn, right? But the price of corn didn't change, okay? Nothing changed about the price of corn, and yet now you're less willing to provide it than you were before. And so the only way that can happen is if I decrease the supply curve, right? If I shift the supply curve to the left here, okay? So the supply of corn in that scenario is going to decrease because now I am less willing to grow corn. And the reason why I'm less willing to grow corn is because the price of soybeans has risen. Okay? All right. In the next video, which I'm going to stop here, in the next video, we'll be talking about equilibrium and shifting the curves.